Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. Hold on, did I unmute myself? I did. Okay, so hi everyone, thanks for joining us at another partner educational session. This session is designed for you. So if you are starting to implement GlycanAge in your practice already, or if you're thinking about it, I believe this will be very useful to you either way. My name is Sophia. Some of you might have already spoken to me on the onboarding session that we have with all of our partners. Here is my email if you need to contact me either in regards to this webinar or in regards to any questions you may have about implementing GlycanAge into your practice. So let's start. The key objectives of this session is for you to be able to understand the glycome and the aging. So we hope that you would be able to grasp the concept of glycome and its role in biological aging. And similarly, we want you to understand the value of GlycanAge as a commercial product. So we want you to recognize the benefits in managing, monitoring, and measuring individual intervention effects. We want you to understand the unique features and differentiation of the GlycanAge in comparison to other biological age tests on the market. We also want you to be able to deliver and interpret GlycanAge results. And this would include accounting for the psychological impact of the results on the patients. We want you to understand the indexes and associated diseases, and we want you to be able to recommend further testing and treatments to your clients. We also want you to be able to navigate challenges you face with the GlycanAge test, because we are very aware that glycans aren't something that you hear about every day. So we want you to identify common difficulties in interpreting the GlycanAge reports and recognize special circumstances for retesting. And finally, we want you to know when and where to seek support if you need it. So who to reach out to, where to seek certain information, and so on. So let's start with understanding what the ideal biomarker should be. So this is specifically catered towards the longevity industry. So we want a perfect biomarker to be able to predict future health and survival better than the chronological age. We want to monitor a basic process that underlies the aging process. We want for the biomarker to be able to retest the biomarker without any harm to the patient. And we want it to be reproducible, responsive, and finally, we want it to work both in humans and in laboratory animals, because we want to test the effect of different interventions first on animals and then obviously on humans. So with that, we want to welcome you to the GlycanAge family. And we are happy that you're here because you've recognized the same problem that we have, and that is that healthcare is largely disease-focused. We also see that you understand that conventional medicine is designed on a one-size-fits-all model, and we know that there is no standard human. And we also see that there is an increasing number of novel therapies that lack evidence. And you probably noticed this in your practice too. There are different interventions, different supplements, different therapies coming out every day, and we have no way to validate the efficacy of them. So what our solution is an evidence-based tool that can help predict disease up to a decade in advance, a tool that will respond to changes so that you can validate the treatment plans that you offer your patients. And also, we want you, this tool is actually designed to track in-person response to therapies, and it also motivates the patient. All in all, with GlycanAge, we aim to make prevention possible. So before we start with the implementation of GlycanAge, we need to understand what glycans are. And I'm sure many of you have already seen this slide, but let's go through this one more time. So what glycans are, they are by their chemical nature, they are carbs, and they are one of the 4 building blocks of life. So together with DNA, with proteins, and with lipids, glycans are one of the 4 building blocks of life. And they exist on most of your proteins and on some of your lipids. As you can see here, the they exist on proteins that are inside of your biolipid membranes of your cells, but they also exist in proteins that flow freely in your blood, such as the immunoglobulins, which we'll talk about later. There are different ways in which glycans help our biology. One of the main things is that they allow cell-to-cell communication and the communication of different proteins. So as I said, glycans allow the communication between different parts of our biology, and we call them the functional effectors because they're not just passive biomarkers that they actually change in response to different interventions, but they also have the role in biology. And this role is to, they modify the response of our immune system once it interacts with the immunoglobulin G, which is the main protein that we are looking at. So we're looking at glycans attached to the immunoglobulin G, which, as you know, is a key glycoprotein in our adaptive immune system, and it is one of the most abundant antibodies in our body or in our blood. So what we are looking at are these different glycans attached to the immunoglobulin G, which can be either anti-inflammatory, which means that the process that they will trigger once the antibody binds to a different cell of our immune system or any other cell, the response of this interaction from our immune system will be anti-inflammatory. If the glycans are predominantly pro-inflammatory, so the glycans that we find on the immunoglobulin G are pro-inflammatory, then the response of our immune system will be pro-inflammatory. So what we are looking at is the balance between these two responses. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can actually see the different glycan structures that we are analyzing with this test. A rule of thumb is the longer the structure, the more anti-inflammatory it acts. So for example, the first structure you can see here, it is very long. It has these red squares on the top. So this is a very anti-inflammatory structure, which we will discuss a bit later. The structure right next to it is very short, and it is a pro-inflammatory structure. So what we are looking at is the glycome, which is a name for collection of glycans. And there are many things that will impact what glycans get attached to your immunoglobulin G. But one of them, or some of them, are age, your biological sex, and your environment. And by environment, I mostly mean your lifestyle. So the glycans adapt to your lifestyle, and they can show us your lifestyle. But another cool thing about glycans is that they change up to a decade before the onset of certain chronic diseases. So from what I've told you so far, we understand that glycans modulate the response of your immune system. So they determine whether this response will be anti or pro-inflammatory. What it basically means is we are looking at inflammation, and specifically we are looking at low-grade chronic inflammation. And you may know that this is one of the 12 hallmarks of aging. So ultimately, what we are doing here is that we are measuring inflammation in the body. What I didn't say in the beginning of this webinar, please do leave any questions you may have either in the Q&A or the chat, and I will get to them a bit later. And also, we do have a Q&A session in an hour and a half. So please join that as well if you have any questions, either in regards to this talk or in regards to anything else related to GlycanAge. Okay, so let's continue. Well, we get asked very often, what's the difference between glycans and other biomarkers? Why should I use glycans? Why can't I just use high sensitivity CRP? Why should I use glycans and not epigenetics? And those are very valid questions. So maybe it will get a bit more clear after we discuss this. So for example, let's look at tests such as glucose, CRP, hormones, cholesterol. So they will change rapidly. They usually change within minutes or hours. Which is good for measuring glucose, for example, because we want to know what the response of our metabolic system is when we intake glucose. However, this will not give us a picture of how well our body usually responds to glucose, right? How well it has been responding to glucose in the last 3 months or 6 months. On the other hand, we have methylation, we have telomeres, we have epigenetics. And these are all of the tests that are used to give you the biological age as well. But the issue here is that they change within years or even decades. And while it's maybe a good measure of how quickly or slowly we are aging, they will not be very responsible or actionable when we are talking about introducing some life changes. With GlycanAge, we are somewhere in the sweet spot. So the frequency of changes in glycans is usually measured in months. So we are talking likely about 3 to 6 months. The GlycanAge is responsible, it is actionable, and it's quite easy to measure. And actually, Professor Tim Spector called this the Goldilocks clock, which I love. It is very stable in terms of if you're going to introduce some kind of a lifestyle change and you don't stick to it a couple of days, this will not most likely impact your GlycanAge in the long run. But it is also very changeable, because if you do manage to stick to it for 3 to 6 months, you will be able to see a positive change. And this paper actually came out recently, so a couple of weeks ago, and what they said is that GlycanAge is the only commercially available test to track responses to different lifestyle changes. You can take a look at this link if you want to read the paper. I think it's very insightful, and it gives you an overview of all the different tests that are being used right now to determine the biological age. I believe you have also seen this slide, but this is very important to understand. So these are two different terms. We have glycation, which is a random, non-regulated, non-enzymatic process. This usually happens when we have too much glucose in our bloodstream, for example, in diabetes. And glucose quite literally sticks to your proteins, it damages them. And what we can measure is glycated hemoglobin, or HbA1c. And this gives us a picture of how well your body regulates sugar, right? On the other hand, we have glycosylation, and this is the process that we are measuring. So this is a controlled, regulated enzymatic process. It is a post-translational modification, which means that this is a process that happens after the amino acid sequence of the protein has been determined, and then this protein gets enhanced even further with glycosylation, and also other post-translational modifications. So let's talk about the test, let's talk about how to do the test, and so on. So the process is very simple. You first have to order the test, and this is done through our dashboard. In the dashboard, you can choose whether you want the test to be sent to your address or to the address of your patient. Once you receive the test, you need to take the sample. So we need 4 drops of blood, and the sample can be taken either at home or at your practice, and it can be done by the client or by you as a medical professional. If you're already drawing blood for other tests, this blood can also be used, but please make sure it doesn't have any additives in it. The next step for you is to assign the test, which is done again through our dashboard, and then you send the sample directly to our lab. The only lab we have right now is in Croatia, and the analysis will take up to 2 to 3 weeks upon receipt of the sample in our lab. You can also track the status of your sample in the partner dashboard. After 2 to 3 weeks, your report will be ready. So it will be available in your dashboard, and you'll be able to download either the PDF or the raw version of the report. And you can choose from client, patient, or clinician versions based on the detail of complexity that you are looking for. The reports right now are available in English, in Croatian, and Japanese, with Spanish and Italian coming soon. And if you want the report to be translated to your language, please reach out to us, and we'll be happy to do that. The correct processing of the samples is very, very important here, because while the GlycanAge is very, very stable, there are some important instructions that you need to follow to make sure that the sample is not damaged or altered in any way. So the first thing we need to do is we need to ensure that your patient's finger is clean before the finger prick to ensure that there is no contamination. So we usually recommend to wash the hands, and then disinfect the finger with the provided alcohol wipe. As I said, we only need 1 drop of blood per each sample circle. So you'll see there is a blood collection card which has 4 circles. We just need 1 drop of blood per circle. Once this is done, you would allow the sample to air dry for 2 to 6 hours and no more than 6, ideally. After that, you would place the sample in the plastic bag which is provided. It needs to be properly sealed. It needs to have the desiccant inside to absorb any excess moisture. And what we also recommend is for you to squeeze out as much air from this plastic bag as possible before closing it. As such, the sample will remain stable in the post for 2 weeks. So please, if you don't hear from us in 2 weeks after you sent the sample, unfortunately, the sample has been lost, or it is too late for us to analyze it because the quality of blood won't be the same. So just let us know and we'll ship out a replacement for you. So let's move on to the report, which is the most important thing to understand here. I believe most of you have seen our report, but let's just go through this one more time. So the first thing that you receive in our report is the actual biological age. So this is the first part that will outline the overall GlycanAge score, and this will be a number between 20 and 80. What it means, it is an overall measure of background chronic inflammation, which contributes to aging. And what's important to note here is, as we said, it is very stable. So if you have a bacterial infection or any acute episode of illness, this will not impact your GlycanAge. So it is very important when you are delivering the news to your patients. It's important to break the news clearly. It is important to remind them that this is a starting point and it is very much changeable, and inform them that you will work together to create a plan to improve this age over time. It's important to understand that GlycanAge is not just a one-time point test. What we are looking at is the delta between multiple testing, and this is because GlycanAge is impacted, as we said, by many things. So from your age, your biological sex, the environment you live in, also your genetics partly. So it's important to understand what the first score isn't completely, isn't what you're stuck with, right? So you can change this, and we know how to change this, and we'll talk about this a bit later. So now that you get the GlycanAge result, the GlycanAge number, what does it mean, right? So what does it mean if your GlycanAge is, if the GlycanAge of your client is less than their chronological age? What does it mean if it's more than their chronological age? So let's look at this. So if their biological age is higher than their chronological age, there's a couple of things we need to look at. First, there might be an existing chronic condition which we need to look into. They also may have a high risk of or a predisposition for developing a certain disease in the future, and this again is something that we'll talk about a bit later. Another thing which might be attributing to this high result is that their lifestyle factors are not optimized, starting from diet, exercise, gut microbiome, their sleep, their stress, supplements they're taking. So all of these factors need to be taken into consideration here. And also what we see in women in postpartum state is that they will have a higher result, whereas pregnant women will have a lower result. So it's important for women who are either pregnant or postpartum, it's important to wait until their cycle stabilizes, and then you can take the GlycanAge test to get an accurate reading. On the other hand, what does it mean if their result is lower? So this is what we want, but there are a couple of things that are important to know. So first, is your client on certain pharmacological therapy, for example, HRT, semaglutide, and so on? Do they have a genetic advantage? For example, people who have centenarians in the family, they will most likely have a lower GlycanAge because they have a genetic predisposition to it. And the third reason might be the third reason for a lower biological age might be that your client is already on some health optimization program or therapy, which is good, and they need to continue with it further. So which questions would be asking either ourselves or the patient in both cases? Let's go through the first case first. So what do we do when our patient is older than expected? The first thing we would do is take their medical history. So could the client be overexercising? And this is one of the most common causes for a higher GlycanAge in healthy patients. So we see this in many biohackers who exercise every day, maybe a couple of times a day, and they do not allow proper rest for their body. They do not supplement well. And this chronic inflammation builds up from too much stress from their workouts. Another question we would ask, is the patient high risk for any chronic disease? And we would first take that for family history. Another question is, could this patient be under or overeating? So what's their nutrition levels like? So this is very important. Next, could this patient be in hormone imbalance? So what we discussed just now, did they have a recent pregnancy? Are they entering perimenopause or menopause? Do they have a testosterone deficiency? These are all very important questions, because as we know, estrogen is a huge regulator of our immune system. And for example, in menopause, when estrogen drops, the chronic inflammation goes up significantly. So this is something to be aware of. Another question is your patient sleep deprived? And if so, what can we do about it? And you would check for other unusual symptoms. You can also do further investigation, especially if we have a patient who is high risk for any chronic disease. So we would take blood tests. We would check their nutrient levels if we suspect that they are under eating or they have a lack of nutrition, or maybe they're consuming too much ultra processed food, and so on. We would also check hormone levels if this is something that we are suspecting. And we would assess their cardiovascular risk. So we would look at apolipoprotein B, cholesterol, BMI, and their blood pressure. So in another case, if our client is younger than expected, we need to see, is that a reflection of their amazing lifestyle, or is that a reflection of something else? So we would first assess medications they're taking. Are they taking HRT? Are they maybe on long-term steroids? Are they maybe taking anti-inflammatory biologic drugs? So all of these drugs will reduce GlycanAge, but this is not a reflection, again, of a healthy lifestyle, but this is a reflection of the drug doing its job. We would also need to consider genetic components. So do they have a genetic advantage? As we discussed, do they have people in their family who have lived a long life? Or do they have a family history of centenarians? And the other question is the patient already being optimized, or do they have a medical condition? So what we would look at is patients on different supplements and certain medications. They will have a lower GlycanAge. Medical conditions like blood transfusions or recent pregnancy will also reduce the GlycanAge. And also, which is interesting, myeloma will also lower the GlycanAge. And we have actually a case study in the end which discusses this. So this is everything that we spoke about summarized. So let's just go quickly through this. Important anomalies to look out for, which would skew the results of the GlycanAge, is first therapy. So as we said, any anti-inflammatory medication which is taken for a longer time, hormone replacement therapy, intravenous immunoglobulin therapy, which makes sense because we are introducing immunoglobulin G, or immunoglobulin in general, which is not ours, let's say. Blood transfusions, again, self-explanatory, and many other medications will affect glycosylation. So just keep an eye out for any medication your client is on, and just be aware that this could also impact the GlycanAge. Surgery is another thing which we haven't spoken about right now, so previously in the previous slides, but what we do know is that most surgeries are followed by a period of high inflammation while the body is healing after the procedure. So for example, an interesting fact is that people or patients who underwent bariatric surgery and consequently weight loss, it does reduce their GlycanAge. However, if we tested them in the first month, we would see that their GlycanAge is very, very high because they have this inflammation in the body, which allows the body to heal. And then after they lose weight, after 3-6 months, these would be realistic results of their weight loss. And this is truly the lowering of their GlycanAge. Also, what we mentioned, diseases are going to impact your GlycanAge, but this is what we want. We want GlycanAge to be able to tell you what diseases your patient either has or what diseases is your patient moving towards. So here you can see all of the diseases, and we'll talk about it a bit later. And other, we've mentioned already, pregnancy and breastfeeding. So we need to wait until the reestablishment of the cycle, perimenopause and menopause, which we already spoke about. And also, it's important to note that extreme transport conditions, so for example, high humidity, high temperatures, will diminish the quality of the sample. And this is why it's very important that you ship the sample to us as quickly as possible, and that you follow all of these tips that I gave you in the previous slides. So now, once we have covered the actual GlycanAge, let's move to the GlycanAge indexes. So we know that we have 5 different indexes in our report. We have the anti-inflammatory indexes, we have the pro-inflammatory index, and we have the supportive indexes. So they are calculated based on different glycan structures. So we have grouped them according to their structure, and we'll see that when I show you what they look like. And they just give us a bit more information about what could be driving this inflammation in the body. So, as I said, the main consultation points are to explain to your patient that these indexes give valuable information on what might be driving GlycanAge either up or down, and it helps to tailor interventions to patients and also track the success of different interventions. And while we're here, I want to emphasize that GlycanAge is not a diagnostic test, but it can definitely help guide diagnosis and treatment plan for your patient. What's important to understand before we dive into the indexes is how the indexes change with age, or how the glycans change with age. So as we said, the most anti-inflammatory structure there is are structures like these. So when we are young, a great number of our glycans look like this. So this is the longest glycan that can be found. As we age or in disease, as we are inching towards developing a certain disease, the glycans will change in this way. So we will first lose these top red squares, which is the sialic acid, and we will be left with 2 galactoses, which is still very, very good. Then we would lose 1 galactose, and then we would lose both galactoses, which is the glycan mature. We'll talk about that in detail in a second. We also have the glycan lifestyle, which is basically this structure, but it has this additional building block in the middle. So it can also have the galactose here and the sialic acid as well. So let's start with the anti-inflammatory indexes. So that is the glycan youth and the glycan shield. Let's start with the glycan youth. So as you can see here, these are glycans which have 2 galactoses, so these 2 green circles at the top of the molecule. And we call this youth because we are very, very abundant with them when we are young. So if we are going to be talking about the science of it, what these, and you don't really need to understand that in that much detail, but if you are interested in understanding the mechanistic effects of glycans, I'm just going to say a couple of sentences about this, and then we'll move on to more relatable, I guess, and digestible things. So what the glycan youth, or the glycan with the galactose, does, it prevents the unwanted pro-inflammatory effects of the C5a component of the complement pathway. All you need to know is that the complement pathway is one of the ways that our immune system works in. And if this system works more than it should, instead of digesting pathogens that enter our body. So how it works is the complement, it has many different bits and it sticks around a certain pathogen. Complement is recognized by the immunoglobulin G. They stick to it, and then a macrophage comes up and it eats up this little pathogen. If we have too much of that complement, it will start sticking to our own cells, and we will start destroying our own cells, which will lead to inflammation and autoimmunity. So it then makes sense that a low glycan use result or a bad glycan use result is associated with the autoimmune disorders such as lupus, celiac disease, IBD, both Crohn and ulcerative colitis, ankylosing spondylitis, and others. It is also associated with older age, with a raised BMI, and with different cancers. So ovarian cancer, endometrial cancer, and colorectal cancer. And what I want to emphasize here is that it doesn't mean that your patient has cancer if their glycan use is low. It only means that you have to be careful and you have to look into the systems to see if there is something going on, because this result could mean that a patient is either susceptible or on their way to develop a certain type of cancer. So just be very careful with the interpretation of it. It does not mean that your patient has cancer, but you need to look into this. And another association is the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So following this, what questions should we ask ourselves and the patient in order to guide our diagnosis? So the first question we would ask, does this patient present with signs of autoimmunity? The second one is, do they need to manage their weight? Have they got a low glycan median, which is something that we will talk about in a second? And do they have a hormonal imbalance? The follow-up steps after getting a bad use result or a low glycan use result, we would do a systems review and symptom assessment of your patient, and we would also check their hormone levels and their body composition. So our goal is to have a higher glycan use, right? And how do we do that? We start with lifestyle interventions. So these are some interventions that we have seen for our clients to work when they have a low glycan use result. So the first one is hormone optimization, and we are talking about HRT, TRT, but it doesn't have to be a therapeutic approach to it. You can also start with stress level management and with diet optimization and see where it leads you. We might have to look at losing weight if indicated. Obviously, if their BMI is higher than it should be. We could introduce moderate and high intensity exercise if this is something that your patient is not doing, introducing calorie restriction, and also managing any existing autoimmune conditions or starting treatment on autoimmune conditions which haven't been diagnosed previously. Okay, let's move on to the glycan shield. And this one is the best glycan that you can have. You want to have as much of it as possible. So this one protects us from chronic inflammation, right? What it says here in terms of the scientific part, they protect us against cell damage, which results from overactive natural killer cell activation. So the more sialic acid on our glycans that we have, the more protected we are from this activation of these natural killer cells, and the less inflammation we have. So the glycan shield or a lower glycan shield result is also associated with older age, with cancer, but different types of cancer this time. And again, the same thing applies. So it does not mean that your patient has cancer, but this is just something to think about. So we have here ovarian, colorectal, and urothelial cancer, and also multiple myeloma. Also, a low glycan shield is associated with autoimmune disorders, again, different ones than the glycan use, Sjogren's syndrome, IBD, ANCA-associated vasculitis, and autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Here we have an addition. So glycan shield is associated with cardiometabolic disease such as type 1 and type 2 diabetes and hypertension. So then the questions we would ask ourselves is first, what the patient's nutrition is like, how varied is their phytonutrient intake, does their nutrition fit their workout regime? Because as I said, it's very important to support your body while you're working out with proper nutrition and rest. And also, is your patient taking the right supplements for them? What would you do next? What are our next steps? Our next steps are to check vitamin and toxin levels. We would check their extended lipid profile. We would consider simple supplementation. And I want to emphasize here, it's important to guide this supplementation by their nutrient blood levels. We cannot supplement our patients, or we wouldn't advise you to give supplements to your patients without seeing what they're deficient in. And the next step would be to also optimize their micronutrient intake. So what about the lifestyle interventions that are helpful for increasing the glycan shield? So definitely introducing a diverse diet, which is rich in phytonutrients. And we usually say the more rainbow and the more diverse food, especially fruits and vegetables, nuts, spices you eat, the better for you. So we are, and as Professor Tim Spector always says, around 30 different plants would be amazing for your patient and for their diet. We would also recommend introducing adequate rest between workout days. So definitely not working out all the time or every day. If that is something that they have under control, we would think about introducing simple supplementation. For example, magnesium, zinc, omega-3, and vitamin D. And what we have right now, or the data that we have right now, which is very much experimental, but we know that glycan shield is indeed responsive to NAD supplementation, whether that is niacin, NR. We don't have much data about NMN, but it is probably also going to affect the glycan shield. So next, let's move on to the pro-inflammatory index, which is glycan mature. So glycan mature doesn't have galactose at all. So this is the shortest glycan that we already talked about, and this is the shortest glycan that you can have. So as you can see, it is structurally and functionally opposite to glycan use. So it doesn't have any galactose units. And if you remember, glycan use has 2 galactose units at the top. So it also activates the complement pathway, and too many glycans without galactose, they can overactivate our complement system. And as we spoke about when discussing glycan use, it will lead to cellular damage and inflammation. So it only makes sense that a high glycan mature is associated again with older age. So as we said, it is opposite to glycan use. One big thing is that is associated with perimenopause and menopause. It is associated with a raised BMI and other diseases that we already spoke about, so cancer, cardiometabolic disease, autoimmune, and inflammatory disease. So the questions we would be asking here for glycan mature is first, could your client's hormones be imbalanced? Are they of perimenopausal age? And if they are, you know that their estrogen is dropping, and you need to supplement that in some way. The next question is your client hitting either extreme of physical activity? So are they too sedentary, or are they maybe overtraining? And you need to find the middle ground here. And another question is their glycan median low? And you can see that this is the same question that we had with glycan youth, again, because these are just the opposite glycan structures, and I'll tell you more when we get to the glycan median. So what would you do next? What we would do is we would check hormone levels, and specifically sex hormones, thyroid hormones, cortisol, melatonin, and insulin. In terms of glycan, glycan mature, what we would do is introduce the following lifestyle interventions, and it says here. So we want a lower glycan mature and a higher glycan use. So this is our goal. We want to tip the scales in favor of glycan use. I hope that makes sense. Please do ask questions if this is not clear. So what we would do in terms of lifestyle, we would introduce regular high-intensity exercise in chronologically younger patients, obviously. We would optimize their hormones. We would recommend extensive weight loss, again, only if it is indicated. And we would recommend introducing adequate rest between workout days. So all of this, we hope, or we have seen, but we hope that this is something that will help improve the glycan mature and also the glycan use for your patients. Okay, this was the pro-inflammatory index. We are now moving on to the supportive indexes. The key thing to know about the supportive indexes is that they do not go into the GlycanAge calculation themselves because they do not change with age. But what they are useful for is monitoring the success of your interventions because they are all connected to different things and different lifestyle changes. So first, the glycan lifestyle, as the name suggests, it is very reflective of your lifestyle choices. And the glycans look something like this. So they have this extra unit here. As I've told you a second ago, it does not change with age, but a low glycan lifestyle, and this is what we want the glycan lifestyle to go to be as low as possible. A low result might indicate familial longevity. However, if we have too much of these glycans, they will again overactivate the immune system and they will lead to cellular damage and inflammation. So we want less of these glycans. The associations are very interesting for this one, I would say. So first is an unhealthy lifestyle and environment. So this one is very responsive to the environment you're in. It is associated with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, so COPD. It is very, very responsive to smoking, and we sometimes even call it the smoker's index because it is, in 99% of cases, it is usually off, so it is very, very high. And again, this is associated with other diseases such as cardiometabolic disease and inflammatory disease. So the questions we would ask, is your patient a smoker? Do they have a diet which is poor in nutrients and rich in ultra-processed food? What are their stress levels? What's their sleep schedule and quality of sleep like? And do they have a family history of diabetes? And after that, our next steps would be to check their BMI, to review their lifestyle habits, to review passive environmental exposures, including some endocrine disruptors. This is very important because if there is nothing obvious in the lifestyle habits of your patients, but their result is still very, very high, it would be a good idea for you to see if there are any endocrine disruptors around them, and most likely there are, because this is just something that we cannot escape nowadays. And also, we would recommend to do a toxin checks, for example, to look at metals, mold, and pollution. There is a number of lifestyle interventions that can be introduced for you to lower the glycan lifestyle index. So let's start. So we would first optimize their nutrition. We would recommend eating less ultra-processed food and more non-processed whole food. We would advise them to stop smoking and or vaping. We would consider an air filter system to use at home. As I said, environment is very big for this index. We would consider caloric restriction and or time restricted eating, depending on what your client needs. If they do not need to be in a caloric deficit, then definitely consider time restricted eating or fasting. Again, weight loss if indicated to your patient. We would introduce stress management techniques. We would optimize sleep by identifying the issue of their poor sleep habits, and we would suggest relevant solutions. So this could be anything from improving their sleep hygiene, introducing melatonin, using blue light blocking glasses, and so on. If all of that is optimized, we would then consider using omega-3 supplementation. But what we usually like to say is that we first focus on the lifestyle, and then if everything is in place, then we would consider supplementation. And the last one is the glycan median, which is a very, very interesting one, I would say, because it's, I would say, bidirectional. So in this case, the presentation of it might be a bit confusing because it looks the same as others. So you have this red part and you have this green part. But what we usually, say to our partners is that we don't want the median to be in either extreme. We want the median to be right at the middle, as the name suggests. Because as you see, it only has one galactose. So it's structurally related both to the glycan youth, but also the glycan mature. And this one is very, very connected to your genes, but also to your cardiovascular system and cardiovascular issues, because cells on our endothelium, so in our blood vessels, they do have receptors for binding this type of glycans, and we don't want to have too much of either extreme, because this is the mechanism that will have a negative effect on our cardiovascular system. So we don't want, as I said, neither extreme, neither too little or too much of glycan median. So what is glycan median connected with? So it associates first with socioeconomic development of the country that your client lives in, which is very interesting because from our research, this is the only index that showed this type of association. As I said, it has a prominent genetic component, and it is less likely to directly change with lifestyle interventions. But it is great to monitor how well you are taking care of your cardiovascular system and the lowering of your risk to develop a cardiovascular disease in the future, and especially in women. And we have also other diseases that glycan median is associated with, and this is autoimmune diseases. The questions we would ask is first, what are your patients' glycan youth and glycan mature? So we have to look at all of these indexes together because they are all very structurally similar. So for example, if we have a bad glycan youth, so we have too little of glycan youth, and we also have a low glycan median, this is a big red flag to us that there is something going on with the cardiovascular system. Same goes for glycan mature. If we have too much glycan mature, that means we have too many glycans without galactose on them. And we also have a low glycan median. This is another red flag that there is something going on with the cardiovascular system. Another question would be, where do they live, which ties into the socioeconomic development of the country. If a patient is female, what is their risk of cardiovascular disease? If we are looking at other factors, so their blood pressure, their lipid panel, and so on. And is there a family history of cardiovascular disease? So what we would do for our patients, we would first assess their cardiovascular disease risk. So we would check the blood pressure, do an extensive lipid profile, which would include all of these metabolites, or not metabolites, analytes. We would also look at high sensitivity CRP and homocysteine. And we would understand their autoimmune profile and risk, which ties into this part. So the goal for glycan median is a bit different than to other indexes. So we want a balanced glycan median. And how do we do that? So we would look to optimize glycan mature and youth balance. And you can refer to the other slides to see how we would do that, but we already went through this. So we want a good glycan youth and a good glycan mature, which means we want as much galactosylated glycans as possible. We would also have to do a cardiovascular disease risk management, especially in women, and autoimmune disease management. So this is just a summary of everything we spoke about the different indexes, and you can refer to this table when you are going to be interpreting results for your own patients. So you have all of that in one place. And the same goes for the improvement of different GlycanAge indexes. For each index, we have summarized what is the biggest influence on all of them. Now, let's go through some key points that we have identified so far. So we know that GlycanAge is a test which would help you understand your client's risk of disease or their level of health resilience. And we know that chronic inflammation is implicated in almost all of the diseases. So GlycanAge can be used to inform you if the patient has a high level of chronic inflammation in their body and therefore a higher risk of disease. And it's important to understand that GlycanAge, although we do have some knowledge on how each index is associated with each disease, we will not be able to tell you exactly which disease your patient has. But as I said, the indexes can be quite helpful in differential diagnosis. What we want you to do, or what you would ideally do, is we would triangulate patient's history, particularly family history, and their lifestyle, to understand what could be truly causing the inflammation, and therefore where would we focus our efforts to reduce their risk of disease. And also, as we already mentioned, medication history is very, very important because many drugs will modulate GlycanAge, because immune system, it is not isolated, it is everywhere, right, in our body. So we need to be aware of the medication that your client is on, so you can understand whether the result of the GlycanAge is a result of the medication or the actual GlycanAge of your patient and the lifestyle efforts they've been doing. And let's just quickly go through the case studies that we have prepared for you. So we have 3 case studies. So this one is very simple, but it's not something that you would think about. So this is a female client. She started testing with us when she was 37, and now she's 38. She's a very active person. She does high intensity running. She says that she has proper nutrition, but as you can see from her age, she might be potentially approaching perimenopause. So her GlycanAge turned out to be 48. This is her baseline measurement. And the key problem that we identified here is that her chronic inflammation is elevated because of the high intensity training. So she was overtraining and she was doing monostructural training, so only running. And also potential perimenopause could be an influence on her biological age. So what we advised her to do was to shift from high intensity running to low intensity cycling. This was the first change that we introduced because we do believe in slow changes and in small number of changes for our clients. And another thing that we introduced, or that we advised her to introduce, was to incorporate fermented foods into her daily diet. After 6 months, she retested again and her GlycanAge dropped by 4 years, which was great. She felt better and her inflammation profile obviously improved as well. So the next steps for her that we would recommend would be introducing of strength training, to review and enhance her supplementation routine. And this is what she did. Her GlycanAge dropped a further 4 years. And we are also recommending her to continue retesting with us to see how low we can go, right? So this is a very simple case study, but it is here to help you understand how you can use GlycanAge for different types of patients and what to pay attention to. This is a very interesting case for us, and we are very, very happy that we managed to catch this. So let's start. This is a female client, 51 years old. She was of slim build, a normal BMI. She was an ex-smoker. She follows a pescatarian diet and she regularly exercises. She also had a hysterectomy in 2019, and she has extensive family history of cardiovascular disease. So her GlycanAge was amazing. However, when we looked into the indexes, what we saw was a poor glycan median and an unfavorable glycocardio index. Now, I did not mention glycocardio in this presentation because this is not something that we are offering to all of our customers, but this is something that you can request from us if you have a client like that. So glycocardio is a tool that we have for evaluating the risk of developing cardiovascular disease. So this woman had a family history of cardiovascular disease, and she also had a recent heart attack in the family. So what she told us is that she was medically evaluated because of this recent scare in her family, and the cardiologist conducted tests, including lab work, ECG, cardiac echo, stress echo, CT coronary angiography, and she had amazing results at the time, and this was probably a year prior to her GlycanAge testing. We directed her to do the testing again because the poor glycan median and unfavorable glycocardio index really pointed at us towards that there is something probably going on with her cardiovascular system. And although it doesn't have to mean that she already has some cardiovascular issues, but she is definitely prone to developing them. So she did listen to us. She did some blood work, and her blood pressure was normal. She had a low coronary artery calcification score. But what was interesting is that CT angiography revealed genetic blockage in one vessel. So she was immediately started on low dose statin. There was no need for vessel stenting, and we definitely recommend ongoing monitoring of GlycanAge, glycan median, and glycocardio index. So this is a good story, in my opinion, for you to see how the GlycanAge can be implemented, not just in the lifestyle interventions, but how you can use it to catch these subtle changes in your biology before they lead to something bigger. And another interesting case study, and this is more related to these anomalies that we spoke about. So this is a male patient, client, who was 90 years old at the time chronologically, and he had a GlycanAge of 20. So he was a physicist by profession. He led an active lifestyle with daily swimming. He ate a mainly vegetarian diet, and he was a known smoker. But he was introduced with smoldering myeloma in his 80s, and he also had glaucoma. So the problem identification, he has an extensive medical history, but the main thing is that he had an initial diagnosis of multiple myeloma, which was treated with medication cocktail. When he changed his oncologist, it turned out that his diagnosis was not correct, but the correct diagnosis was smoldering myeloma. His IgG levels were way above the standard acceptable range, as you can see here. And when we took a look at this client, it was apparent to us that the client fulfills many of the longevity criteria. Okay, I just see the messages. Thank you very much, Marco. So yeah, he fulfills many of the longevity criteria, and he maintains an active and healthy lifestyle despite age and his medical condition. So it is obvious that for this patient, GlycanAge cannot be used to give an accurate picture of his health because he has a very, very serious diagnosis. But what GlycanAge can offer him is insight into the progress of disease, potential relapse and therapy response. So we will be able to see if his GlycanAge goes up, we will know that there is something going on either with his therapy or the disease is not managed in a proper way, and so on. These results align with characteristics of smoldering myeloma. So these patients usually have an anti-inflammatory profile, which is very, very counterintuitive. And this is why you have to understand the GlycanAge very well to be able to give proper care to your patients. And I hope this is something that you are going to gain with this presentation. So the next step for this man would be to continue his current lifestyle habits that contribute to his low GlycanAge and his overall health. And we would definitely recommend to have regular checkups with the oncologist and ophthalmologist for his existing medical conditions. And we are approaching the end of this presentation, but there is one more thing I want to tell you. So we are working very, very hard on improving our product and on giving you more information that you can use in your practice for your clients and for their benefit. So we know that glycans have abundant potential. And although we do not understand glycans fully because glycans are very complex and the analysis of glycans is very complex, and this is not something that is extensively researched, obviously apart from our scientific group. But what we do know is that glycans exhibit certain pattern changes which are associated with different diseases. So what we call those changes are glycan fingerprints, and I'll show you in a second. So these changes can occur up to 10 years before the disease develops, and these fingerprints can be used to predict a risk of your patient developing a certain disease. And as I said, we are doing our best to bring this new information to you so that you can use it in your practice. And it is still in beta testing stage. However, we can offer you something to use right now if you're interested in doing your own research and if you're interested to learn a bit more about glycans. So you might have seen this wheel already, the wheel of disease, the wheel of misery, however you want to call it, because this is very, very complex, or it looks complex, but I'll tell you a bit more about this right now. So what we did is we looked at over 400 papers on glycans and changes in glycosylation, which are associated with different diseases. And as you can see here, we split the diseases that we found into a couple of categories. So we have autoimmune, inflammatory, and alloimmune diseases. We have cardiometabolic diseases, infection-related inflammation, neurological diseases, cancer, and other conditions. And for each of these conditions, you have these little boxes. So you have G0, G1, G2, blah, blah, blah. Now, I hope you remember what it means, but if you don't, I have put this little cheat sheet for you here. So you can see the name of the glycan index and their scientific name, which basically describes their structure. So for example, glycan youth, we know that it has 2 galactoses, hence the G2. For glycan mature, we know that it doesn't have galactose on it, G0, and so on and so on. So if we are looking at, let's say, colorectal cancer. So we know that G0, it is high in patients who have colorectal cancer, and the red indicates that it is high. Blue means that those indexes are lower in patients with colorectal cancer than in healthy individuals. Black means that there is conflicting data in the literature about this. And red, again, as we said, means that this is a high. White means that there was no change observed in those patients. And just a note here, we are not, unfortunately, looking at the F component because this is something that is not possible to analyze from dried blood spots because those structures are not stable in a dried blood spot. So you can use this to see how much the glycan profile of your patients overlaps with these results. And obviously, because you only have 5 different categories, this cannot be very specific, but it can help guide your decision-making and differential diagnosis into a certain direction based on these indexes. So let's sum it up. I have already been talking for an hour. Let's extract some key points from this presentation. So what we learned is that GlycanAge is a responsive biological age test which offers a holistic view of the internal health of your patient, and it measures chronic inflammation. We also know that the initial biological age can sometimes be shocking, so it's important to let the patient know that this is very changeable, and also we need to emphasize the importance of retesting to assess improvement of change over time. So as I said, what you as professionals should focus on is this delta between measurings, not the actual biological age, but the delta is way more important in our opinion. Also, we learned that the indexes offer guidance to understand what inflammatory processes could be driving deviations from the chronological age. And also, if there are any scenarios when you have results you do not understand, you have access to our specialists to seek advice. So what you can do is go onto your partner dashboard, and you have on the top right corner, you have a button where you can book a call with one of our specialists. You can send them any information about the client that you have. You can send them the report, and they will help you understand what is going on with this patient and how you can help them. So I hope this was helpful for you all. If you have any questions right now, please feel free to write them in the Q&A section. If you don't, I will see you in 25 minutes at the Q&A, at the general Q&A session. Thank you.